and welcome back to English as a Second Language. I'm David, and I'm really happy you've decided to spend some time with me today. If you're new to the channel, welcome aboard, and if you're a regular listener, thanks for coming back. It always makes my day knowing you're here learning with me. Today's episode is part of our IELTS series, where we dive deep into topics that commonly appear in the IELTS speaking test, especially in part 3. And let me tell you, today's topic is one that gets people talking wherever you go in the world. We're going to explore the question, should university be free for everyone? Now, I know you might be thinking, David, that sounds like a pretty heavy topic, and you're right, it is. But here's the thing. These are exactly the kinds of discussions you'll need to have in your IELTS speaking test. And more importantly, these are real conversations that happen every day between educated people around the world. By the end of today's episode, you'll not only understand different perspectives on this issue, but you'll also have picked up some fantastic vocabulary that will help you sound more natural and confident when discussing complex topics in English. Oh, and don't worry, I'll be reviewing some of that useful vocabulary at the end of the episode, so you can take notes if you want, but don't stress about catching every single word as we go along. So grab a cup of coffee or tea, get comfortable, and let's dive into this fascinating topic together. Trust me, by the time we're done, you'll have plenty to say about university education, whether you're in an IELTS exam room or just having a casual conversation with friends. Just last week, I was having dinner with my friend Maria. She's from Brazil, and she's been living here in the UK for about 3 years now. We somehow got onto the topic of education, and she told me something that really stuck with me. She said, David, when I was growing up, my parents used to tell me that education was the key to a better life. But now I'm wondering if that key is becoming too expensive for most people to afford. Maria's comment really got me thinking because it touches on something that affects millions of families around the world. In some countries, university education is completely free. In others, students graduate with debts that can take decades to pay off. And in some places, higher education is simply out of reach for anyone who wasn't born into a wealthy family. This question of whether university should be free for everyone isn't just about money, it's about fairness, opportunity, and what kind of society we want to live in. It's about whether we believe that a person's ability to learn should be limited by their family's bank account, or whether we think that talent and hard work should be the only things that matter. Let me start by painting a picture for you. Imagine two 18-year-old students, let's call them Alex and Sam. Both of them are incredibly bright, both have worked hard in school, and both dream of becoming doctors. They've both been accepted to medical school. But here's where their stories diverge. Alex comes from a well-off family. Alex's parents have been saving money for university since Alex was born. They can afford to pay for tuition, books, accommodation, and living expenses without taking on any debt. Alex can focus entirely on studying and doesn't need to worry about money. Sam, on the other hand, comes from a working-class family. Sam's parents both work full-time jobs, but they live paycheck to paycheck. They want to support Sam's education, but they simply can't afford the tens of thousands of dollars that medical school costs. Sam faces a difficult choice: take on enormous debt that will take decades to repay, or give up on the dream of becoming a doctor. This scenario plays out thousands of times every year in countries around the world, and it raises a fundamental question. Should your family's financial situation determine your access to higher education? Those who argue that universities should be free for everyone often point to this exact issue. They believe that education is a basic human right, not a luxury product that should only be available to those who can afford it. When we make higher education free, they argue, we create a more equal society where everyone has the opportunity to develop their talents and contribute to their fullest potential. Let me tell you about Finland, a country that's often held up as a model for free higher education. In Finland, not only is university education free for Finnish citizens, but it's also free for students from other European Union countries. Finnish students don't graduate with crushing debt, and this has created a society where people can choose their careers based on their interests and abilities rather than on what will pay enough to cover their student loans. The results speak for themselves. Finland consistently ranks among the top countries in the world for educational achievement, innovation, and social mobility. When students don't have to worry about debt, they can take risks, pursue research, start businesses, or work in public service, all things that benefit society as a whole. But the benefits of free university education extend beyond just individual students. When higher education is accessible to everyone, regardless of their background, it creates what we call a more diverse and dynamic workforce. Companies get access to talent from all social classes, not just from wealthy families. This diversity of perspectives and experiences can lead to more innovation, better problem solving, and stronger economic growth. There's also what economists call the multiplier effect of education. When more people have access to higher education, they tend to earn higher salaries throughout their lives. This means they pay more in taxes, which can actually help fund the free education system. They also spend more money in the economy, creating jobs and stimulating economic growth. In this way, free higher education can be seen as an investment that pays dividends for the entire society. However, as with most complex issues, there are compelling arguments on the other side as well. Critics of free higher education raise several important concerns, and it's worth examining these carefully. One of the most significant arguments against free university education is the question of cost. Who pays for it? The answer, of course, is taxpayers. In countries with free higher education, everyone contributes through their taxes to fund universities, whether they attended university themselves or not. Some people argue that this isn't fair. Why should someone who became a successful plumber or electrician without going to university have to pay for someone else's degree? This leads to what some economists call the redistribution question. In many societies, people who attend university tend to come from middle class and upper middle class families, even when education is free. This is because these families often have what sociologists call cultural capital. They understand how the education system works, they have networks of contacts, and they can provide support and guidance to their children throughout their studies. If this is true, then free higher education might actually be a form of regressive taxation, where working class taxpayers end up subsidizing the education of middle class students who would have gone to university anyway and who will go on to earn higher salaries than those who paid for their education through taxes. Another concern is what happens to the quality of education when it's free. Critics argue that when students don't have to pay for their education, they might not value it as much. They might be less motivated to study hard, less likely to attend classes regularly, and more likely to treat university as an extension of their social life rather than a serious investment in their future. There's also the question of resource allocation. Universities are expensive to run. They need qualified professors, modern equipment, well-stocked libraries, and proper facilities. When education is free, universities depend entirely on government funding, which can be unpredictable and subject to political changes. In some countries, this has led to overcrowded classrooms, outdated equipment, and overworked professors. Some critics also argue that free higher education can lead to what they call credential inflation. When degrees become easily accessible, employers might start requiring higher and higher qualifications for jobs that don't really need them. This can create a situation where people feel pressured to spend more and more years in education just to qualify for basic jobs, even though the actual skills required for those jobs haven't changed. Let me share another story that illustrates some of these complexities. I have a friend named Thomas who grew up in Germany, where university education is largely free. Thomas told me that while he was grateful for the opportunity to study without debt, he also noticed that many of his classmates seemed to drift through their degrees without much purpose or direction. Because it didn't cost anything, Thomas explained. Some students would enroll in programs just because they couldn't decide what else to do with their lives. They would change majors multiple times, take much longer than necessary to graduate, or sometimes just drop out after a few years. Meanwhile, the universities were overcrowded and it was hard to get individual attention from professors. Thomas's experience highlights one of the challenges of free higher education. How do you ensure that students take their studies seriously and use resources efficiently when they're not paying directly for them? Now, let's look at some middle ground approaches that different countries have tried. Not every education system is strictly free or expensive. There are many models in between that try to balance accessibility with sustainability. One popular approach is what's called income contingent loans. Under this system, students can borrow money to pay for their education, but they only have to repay the loans once they start earning above a certain threshold. The repayments are typically calculated as a percentage of their income, so people with lower salaries pay less and people with higher salaries pay more. In some versions of this system, any remaining debt is forgiven after a certain number of years. Australia and the UK have variations of this system, and it's designed to ensure that no one is prevented from attending university because of their family's financial situation, while also ensuring that those who benefit from higher education contribute to its cost. Another approach is means-tested financial aid, where students from low-income families receive grants or scholarships that cover all or most of their education costs, while students from wealthier families pay full fees. This is common in the United States, though critics argue that the system is complex and that many students from middle-class families fall through the cracks. Their families earn too much to qualify for aid, but not enough to comfortably afford university fees. Some countries have also experimented with graduate taxes, where all university graduates pay a small additional tax for a certain number of years after graduation, regardless of how much their education originally cost. This spreads the cost of higher education among those who have benefited from it, while also ensuring that universities have a stable source of funding. There's also the question of what free actually means. Even in countries where tuition is free, students still need to pay for accommodation, food, books, and other living expenses. This means that university education is never truly free, it's just that the costs are structured differently. Denmark, for example, not only offers free university education, but also provides students with a monthly allowance to help cover their living expenses. This means that students can focus on their studies without needing to work part-time jobs to support themselves. However, this system requires very high tax rates to fund, which not all societies are willing to accept. When we think about this issue from a global perspective, it becomes even more complex. In developing countries, the question isn't just whether higher education should be free, but whether countries should prioritize spending on universities when many children don't even have access to basic primary education. Some economists argue that in countries with limited resources, it makes more sense to focus on improving primary and secondary education for everyone before making higher education free for the few. They point out that the social benefits of universal literacy and numeracy are greater than the benefits of free university education for a small percentage of the population. However, others argue that developing countries need highly educated professionals, doctors, engineers, scientists, and business leaders to drive economic development. Without access to higher education, these countries might lose their brightest minds to emigration as talented young people move to countries where they can afford to study. This brings us to another important consideration: brain drain. When higher education is expensive in one country but free or affordable in another, it can create incentives for talented students to study abroad and potentially never return. This can deprive countries of the skilled professionals they need for development. On the other hand, some argue that international mobility of students and professionals can benefit everyone. When people study in different countries, they bring back new ideas, perspectives, and connections that can help their home countries develop. The key is finding ways to encourage this beneficial exchange while ensuring that countries don't lose all their educated citizens to permanent emigration. Let's also consider the changing nature of work and education in the 21st century. Traditional university degrees are no longer the only path to a successful career. Many of today's most in-demand jobs require skills that can be learned through online courses, apprenticeships, or professional certifications rather than traditional four-year degrees. This raises questions about whether we should be focusing so much on making university education free, or whether we should be investing in alternative forms of education and training that might be more relevant to the modern economy. Some argue that we should be creating more pathways to success, including vocational training, apprenticeships, and continuous professional development throughout people's careers. Technology is also changing the cost structure of education. Online courses can reach thousands of students at once, potentially making high-quality education much more affordable. Some universities are experimenting with hybrid models that combine online learning with traditional classroom instruction, which could help reduce costs while maintaining quality. However, there are concerns about whether online education can provide the same benefits as traditional university education. University isn't just about learning facts and skills, it's also about developing critical thinking, building networks, and having experiences that help shape you as a person. It's unclear whether these benefits can be fully replicated in an online environment. As we think about the future of higher education, we also need to consider demographic trends. In many developed countries, birth rates are declining, which means there will be fewer young people entering university in the coming decades. This could make it easier to provide free higher education simply because there will be fewer students to support. However, increasing life expectancy and changing career patterns mean that more people might need to return to education multiple times throughout their lives. This could increase the overall demand for higher education, even if the number of traditional university-age students decreases. There's also the question of what subjects should be prioritized if public funds are limited. Should free education be available for all subjects, or should societies focus their resources on areas that are most likely to benefit the economy and society as a whole? This raises difficult questions about the value of different types of knowledge and who should decide what's worth studying. Some countries have tried to address this by making certain subjects free while charging for others. For example, they might provide free education for students studying medicine, engineering, or education, while charging fees for students studying arts or humanities. However, this approach is controversial because it implies that some types of knowledge are more valuable than others. Now, let me ask you to think about this issue from your own perspective. What's your experience with higher education? Did you attend university? If so, how did you pay for it? Did financial considerations influence your choice of what to study or where to study? And if you didn't attend university, was cost one of the factors in that decision? These personal experiences often shape how we think about education policy. Someone who graduated with large debts might be more sympathetic to arguments for free education, while someone who worked hard to pay for their own education might feel that others should do the same. It's also worth considering the cultural context. In some societies, there's a strong belief that individuals should be responsible for their own success and that government should play a minimal role in people's lives. In these societies, the idea of free higher education might be seen as government overreach or an unfair burden on taxpayers. In other societies, there is a stronger tradition of collective responsibility and social solidarity. In these contexts, free higher education might be seen as a natural extension of other public services like healthcare and primary education. The political dimensions of this issue are also important. Education policy is often a major topic in elections, and different political parties typically have very different views on how higher education should be funded. Conservative parties often favor market-based approaches with student fees and loans, while progressive parties often support free or low-cost education funded by taxes. These political differences can lead to policy instability where education systems change dramatically when different parties come to power. This can be disruptive for students, universities, and society as a whole, as it becomes difficult to plan for the future when the rules keep changing. As we near the end of our discussion, I want to emphasize that there's no simple answer to the question of whether universities should be free for everyone. The best approach depends on a country's economic situation, cultural values, political system, and educational needs. What's clear is that access to higher education is becoming increasingly important in our knowledge-based economy. Whether that access is provided through free education, affordable loans, scholarships, or other means, societies need to find ways to ensure that talent and hard work, not family wealth, determine who gets the opportunity to develop their potential through higher education. The challenge is finding sustainable ways to fund higher education that don't place an unbearable burden on taxpayers, while also ensuring that universities have the resources they need to provide high-quality education. This requires careful policy design, ongoing evaluation, and the flexibility to adapt as circumstances change. Before we wrap up, let me ask you a few questions to help you think through what we've discussed today. Take a moment to consider your own views on these issues. First, do you think education is a basic human right that should be provided free by the government? Or do you see it more as a service that individuals should pay for because they're the ones who benefit from it? What experiences or values have shaped your thinking on this? Second, if you had to choose between having free higher education but higher taxes, or having students pay for their own education but lower taxes, which would you choose? What factors would influence your decision? Third, do you think there are some subjects or fields of study that are more deserving of public funding than others? For example, should society prioritize funding for students studying medicine or engineering over those studying art or philosophy? How would you decide? Fourth, what role do you think technology should play in making higher education more accessible and affordable? Do you think online education can provide the same benefits as traditional university education? And finally, thinking about your own country or region, what do you think would be the biggest challenges in implementing free higher education? Would it be the cost, political opposition, concerns about quality, or something else? These are the kinds of questions that you might encounter in IELTS Part 3. And there are also the kinds of discussions that educated people have in many different contexts. The key to handling these questions well is to have considered different perspectives, to be able to give specific examples, and to express your own views clearly while acknowledging that others might reasonably disagree. Well, that brings us to the end of today's deep dive into the question of whether university should be free for everyone. I hope you've found this discussion thought-provoking and that it's given you some new vocabulary and ideas to work with. Throughout our conversation today, we've covered several important terms that are really useful for discussing education and social policy. We talked about higher education, which is the formal term for university-level study. We discussed social mobility, which refers to the ability of people to improve their social and economic status through their own efforts. We explored the concept of cultural capital, which describes the knowledge, skills, and connections that help people succeed in society. We also talked about means-tested financial aid, which is help that's given based on a person's financial situation, and income contingent loans, which are loans that you only have to repay when you earn above a certain amount. We discussed brain drain, which is when educated people leave their home countries to work elsewhere, and credential inflation, which is when employers require higher and higher qualifications for jobs that don't really need them. These terms will serve you well, not just in IELTS, but in any academic or professional context where you need to discuss education policy and social issues. Remember, the goal isn't just to memorize these words, but to understand how they fit into larger conversations about fairness, opportunity, and social responsibility. The more you can connect individual vocabulary items to bigger ideas and real world examples, the more natural and confident you'll sound when using them. I want to thank you for joining me on this journey today. Exploring complex topics like this one is exactly what will help you develop the kind of English skills that will serve you well in academic, professional, and personal contexts. You're not just learning a language, you're developing the ability to think critically and express complex ideas clearly, which are valuable skills in any language. Keep practicing, keep questioning, and keep exploring new ideas. Every time you engage with challenging topics like this, you're building the confidence and skills you need to succeed in whatever you choose to do with your English. I'll be back next week with another episode in our IELTS series. Until then, take care, keep learning, and remember, every conversation is an opportunity to grow. See you soon.